Hi, welcome to our channel of IGNOU audiobooks. Indira Gandhi National Open University, Diploma in HIV and Family Education, DAFE, BFEE-104 Communication and Counselling in HIV Block-1 Basics of Communication Unit 2 Communication Concepts, Types and Process 2.0 Objectives. This unit aims at understanding the term communication and some of the most important definitions. We shall study the communication process consisting of sender, receiver, channel, message and feedback. We examine the leading models of communication. Study of communication today calls for an understanding of the impact of technological revolution and the global nature of communication. Socio-cultural constituents like language, sign, symbol, feedback and noise are also presented in this section. The unit concludes with some basic notions about the types of communication. We shall elaborate these types in the subsequent units. As a result of studying this unit, the student is expected to be familiar with the following: the term and definitions of communication, the communication process and models of communication, technological revolution and global communication, socio-cultural constituents like language, symbol, feedback and noise, and types of communication. 2.1 Introduction. Communication is basic to much of human life and activity. The interdisciplinary nature of communication calls for a study of the fundamental principles and issues in communication. Communication, as we shall see shortly, is both individual and collective necessity. Human beings cannot be fully human without communication. Communication is not only a necessity, but a basic right. A fundamental human right as communication must be upheld, because it is necessary for the proper functioning and development of human beings and the social environment in which they live. As we shall see, the ultimate objective of all communication is to establish commonness and communion. We need to understand the basic principles of communication in order that we may grasp the way communication influences the life of individuals and society. It is also necessary to understand the way the various instruments of communication, traditional and modern, function. 2.2 Term and definitions. Etymologically, the word communication comes from the Latin word communis, meaning common. When we communicate, we are trying to establish commonness with someone. That is, we are trying to share information, an idea or an attitude. The standard definition of communication reflects the everyday usage of the term. To communicate is defined as to impart, bestow, or convey, to make known, give by way of information. The New Webster's Dictionary defines communication as the act or fact of communicating, transmission, the imparting or interchange of thoughts, opinions, or information by speech, writing or signs, that which is communicated or imparted, a document or message imparting views or information. According to the Oxford Dictionary, communication is the imparting, conveying or exchanging of ideas, knowledge etc., by means of speech, writing or any attempt to define communication, has to take into consideration the idea of mutuality and commonness, an exchange, a shared environment, a social relationship among the participants and the existence of a common need, urge, aim or goal. Communication is said to take place when an area of common experience exists. There are numerous definitions of communications, but the common strand running through them all is that communication is a social process of interaction through messages. According to Dennis McQuail, communications is a process which increases commonality. He describes human communication as the sending from one person to another of meaningful messages. Charles Morris gives two definitions of communication, one broader than the other. Broadly, communication is the establishment of a commonage. In the limited sense, it means use of signs to establish a commonage of signification. George Lundberg uses communication to designate interaction by signs and symbols. Baker Brownell uses the terms direct and indirect communication. Direct communication is a function of identification of people with one another. Indirect communication is a process wherein something converted into symbols is carried over from one person to another. Theodore Newcomb defines communication as that process by which people influence each other or leave impression on others. Shannon's is perhaps one of the most comprehensive definitions. According to his mathematical theory of communication, communication includes all of the procedures by which one mind may affect another, or one mechanism affects another mechanism. From the above definitions, we can derive certain important insights for our analysis. In the first place, the definitions either broaden or delineate the meaning of communication. In the broadest definition, certain animal responses and even mechanical interactions fall into the category of communication. In the more restricted sense, communication includes interaction between persons. Secondly, the definitions point to the importance and value of considering communication from the perspective of the receiver. Communication research as well as everyday experience reveals that by far the emphasis is on the former. Together these factors give us what is called a communication situation in which the process of communication takes place. But communication, as Ashley Montague and Floyd Matson put it, is more than a clash of symbols, more than media and message, information and persuasion. It is not a matter of isolated entities sending discrete messages back and forth. It is the essential human connection. Whether clear or garbled, tumultuous or silent, deliberate or fatally inadvertent, communication is the gerund of meeting and the foundation of community. It comprises all modes of behavior and expression which establish, project and promote ideas, principles, hypotheses, beliefs and faiths which bind human societies in their various enterprises and activities. 2.3 The communication process. Aristotle, one of the earliest to speak of a model of communication, identified these three elements. He calls them I, speaker, 2, the speech, and 3, the audience. A more widely accepted model of communication is that of Harold Lasswell and David Berlow. According to their model, communication requires at least 4 elements: the source, the message, channel, and receiver, SMCR. The sender or source may be an individual, speaking, writing, drawing, gesturing, or a communication organization, a newspaper, publishing house, television station, or a motion picture studio. The sender may use oral, written, graphic signs or symbols to convey the message. The communication skills, attitudes and convictions, the knowledge of the content, objectives, the socio-cultural milieu, etc. of the sender have an impact on the effectiveness of communication. Messages are made of signs or symbols and codes that are signals, which represent something. Messages may be in the form of ink on paper, sound waves in the air, impulses in an electric current, a wave of the hand, a flag in the air, or any other signal capable of being interpreted meaningfully. Messages are encoded and those who receive them must decode them to interpret or understand the meaning of the message. The message constitutes the core of the communication process. It needs to be formulated to suit the specific needs of the receiver and must be expressed in an intelligible way to have the desired objective. According to Wilbur Schramm, the message must fulfill certain conditions if it is to arouse the desired response in the receiver. The message must be so designed and delivered as to gain the attention of the intended audience. 2. The message must employ signs that refer to the experiences common to source and the receiver, so as to get the meaning across. 3. The message must arouse the needs in the receiver and suggest some ways to meet these needs. 4. The message must suggest a way to meet these needs which is appropriate to the context in which the receiver finds himself/herself at the time when he/she is moved to make the desired response. Channel. Channel refers to the means employed to transmit or receive message. It refers to the 5 senses: seeing, touch, hearing, smell and taste. A message is received through any of the above modes of sensory perception. A message may be seen through print or visual media. It can be heard through a sound media or voice, audio, speech, musical instruments. It can be seen and heard as in the case of films, television and other audiovisual media. Can be touched, smelt or tasted through models, exhibits, specimens and experiments. Most often several sensory faculties are involved in the communication process. Communication is more effective and lasting, meaning clearer when several sensory faculties are involved in receiving meaning. Channel also includes mechanical devices. No message can be transmitted unless they are encoded. When we communicate through language or speech, we encode the message into written or spoken words. We use signs and symbols to communicate. The deaf and mute are taught to follow the sign language. In order to communicate messages to a distance, we use sound waves. In order to make them last, we use writing. In order to complete the act of communication, the message must be decoded. Receiver. The receiver, also called a destination, may be an individual or a group, a crowd, or a mob, reading, listening or watching. The receiver is the object in the communication process. The sender must constantly keep the needs, aspirations, knowledge, sociocultural milieu and background of the receiver if their message is to have the desired objective. The following chart illustrates the human communication process. Wilbur Schramm speaks of the field of experience as an important factor for effective communication. The source can encode, and the destination can decode. Only in terms of the experience each has had. If there has been no common field of experience, communication is impossible. Schramm illustrated this with the experience of an African tribesman who sees an airplane for the first time. The plane may seem to him to be a bird, and the aviator a god born on wings. The film Gods Must Be Crazy illustrates this idea. Here the experience of the source and the destination are strikingly different. This difficulty persists when we try to communicate with cultures that are much different from ours. The sender message channel receiver model has been criticized for presenting communication as linear and definite. Communication is an endless process, and hence it is misleading to think of the communication process as starting somewhere and ending somewhere. The science of cybernetics has provided important insights into the process of communication by making available analytical tools like signs, symbols, feedback, redundancy, noise, etc. Perhaps the greatest contribution of cybernetics to the communication process has been that of feedback. Feedback not only makes communication circular but also enables modification possible at different stages in the process of communication. Another important factor in the communication process is the significance of symbol. Symbols are the basic units of communication systems. They can be verbal, as in the spoken word, graphic as in the written word, or representational as in a flag or banner. Language is a system of symbols used universally as the primary vehicle of communication. 2.4 Communication models. In the vast field of communication studies, there are numerous communication models. No one model is suitable for all purposes and all levels of analysis. We shall consider three models of communication presented by Harold Lasswell, George Gerbner, and David Berlow. All the three models describe the four components of the communication process we have mentioned, namely, the source, communicator, the message, the channel, the receiver, audience, and only Berlow omits the effect or consequence component. The Lasswell model, perhaps the most widely quoted of all models of the communication process, who says what in which channel to whom, with what effect, captures the essence of the communication process in an economy of words. It is a communicator-based linear model. Communication, according to Lasswell, is one-way or two-way. His concern is the effect rather than the meaning. Gerbner's model is a development on previous theories based on the linear process model. It relates the message to the reality that it is about and thus enables us to approach questions of perception and meaning, and it sees communication process as consisting of two alternating dimensions, the perceptual or the receptive, and the communicating or means and control dimension. The merit of Gerbner's model is in localizing the meaning in the culture. Human perception is determined by the culture. Consequently, it helps to explain different reception or interpretation of the same message by different audience. Berlow's source message channel receiver model, SMCR, popularized in his landmark volume The Process of Communication, continues to remain a useful interpretation of the process of communication. He introduces 6 constituents of the communication model, namely, the communication source, the encoder, the message, the channel, the decoder, and the communication receiver. These, he says, should not be viewed as separate things or entities or people. They are the names of behaviors that have to be performed for communication to occur. The 3 models we have seen above can be summarized in the following chart. Look at the screen. We have seen how the various perspectives evolve from rather elementary definitions of the communication process to more sophisticated theories and models. We have also seen their possible impact on the communication process. The definitions, theories and models yield important conclusions for our study of communication. The models assist us in our understanding of whether the process of communication in the society in which we live is sender-centered, who, receiver-centered, to whom, or message-centered, what, channel/media-centered, how, goal-centered, with what effect. They also tell us that if the aim of communication is transmission of message to establish commonness, then the process must be two-way rather than one-way, circular rather than linear. Communication must also take into account factors like context, culture, symbolic systems, and field of experience. 2.5 Technological Revolution and Global Communication. The modern age of communication is generally considered to date from the invention of printing. This was preceded by the invention of paper. Another significant stage in the history of the growth of communication was the production and application of electricity, which facilitated the development of telegraph, telephone, radio, and cinema. These new technologies entered directly into the industrialized era of mass communication. From the second half of the last century onwards, there has been an accelerated development of new resources, techniques, and technological devices in communication, particularly for transmitting and receiving signals and messages. Since the second half of the 20th century, the technological revolution gathered immense speed. Technology today has made communication fast, global, and cheaper. Today we have many of new ways of communicating, thanks to the growth of communication technologies. Telephone, which was a person-to-person instrument for communication, has assumed new roles. Mobile telephone is changing the way people communicate. Television, as an audio-visual medium, continues to gain in popularity. We have a whole list of instruments that aid quick and more global communication, like satellites, magnetoscopes, video discs, teletext, home computers, internet, telematics, and so on. The digital revolution have affected communication in numerous ways. These communication facilities have virtually abolished the barriers of time and space. Distances have ceased to be an obstacle. Today, information and data can be carried across the globe in an instant. Data can be stored and retrieved in a relatively easy way. The technological revolution in communication has important consequences. Any significant change in the field of communication in the past has been followed by important transformation of social structures. Thus, the art of printing helped to hasten the collapse of the feudal systems. The development of newspapers, telegraph, and telephone greatly contributed to democratizing society. Through the new media developed since the turn of the last century: film, 1895, radio, 1897-1921, and television, 1935, the frontiers between peoples and cultures were crossed in a permanent way. The information provided through these media became more and more international and intercultural. We are already witnessing the impact of the new electronic media using the silicon chip in transistor and computer, and in overcoming distance by satellites. Nevertheless, communication revolution is not to be equated with technological development. The former reflects only one aspect of the latter. Peoples, social organizations, and nations have already begun to study critically the way communication and mass media operate in the world today. The French government commissioned Norman Commission Report, 1978, emphasized the qualitative leap forward taking place in the field of social application of communication technology. All technological revolution in the past, the report pointed out, have caused a profound reorganization of the economy and society. They can be simultaneously the occasion of a crisis and the way out of it. That was the case with the invention of steam engine, railways, and electricity. The Informatics revolution is bound to have a greater impact than these. Since the mid-1960s, there has been a broad movement toward more decentralized local media. This paved the way for the countries of the developing nations of the world to call for a new World Information and Communication Order, IGNOU. First within the movement of non-aligned countries and later at the General Assembly of the United Nations, IGNOU demanded the establishment of a free and balanced flow of information and rejected any attempt at cultural colonialism. Several experts in the field of communication and mass media have studied the effects of the new technology in communication. One of the important consequences of the communication revolution accentuated by the technological revolution is the invasion of mass media as a substitute for dialogue, the basis of human society and democracy. During the first decades of the last century, until 1920s, approximately 80% of human communication was accounted for by the spoken word, and only 20% by other means such as the press, the telephone and the radio broadcasts. By the end of the 20th century, through the telematics revolution, the opposite happened. A mere 10 to 15% of human communication was carried out through the spoken words, the rest through machines. This is one of the fatal consequences of development without adequate technological controls. As the years go by, written communication will increasingly replace dialogue and authoritarianism will supplant democracy. This technological phenomenon coincides with the growing development of a transnational power structure, economic power, technological power, ideological power and political power. Technology in itself is neither good nor bad. It is neutral. It provides no answer to the why or the what force of life, it only answers hows, or as we have learned through the language of its most powerful masters, the centers of developed industrialized power. Technology only provides the know-how. Though the future of mass communication is filled with creative potential, it may be observed that the technological developments in communication are neither necessarily positive nor negative. What we choose to do in response to the new technology and how we choose to interpret its use are the vital questions. The so-called increase in communication has been mostly in terms of technology and the quantity of information. From the Gutenberg era to the electronic era, the radius of communication has widened, making it possible to reach everyone on Earth. The mass media are not, however, designed to be instruments for the improvement of the quality of communication, as it is based on transmitting messages according to a linear sender-receiver model. 2.6 Socio-cultural constituents in communication. Socio-cultural constituents play no negligible role in communication, be it interpersonal or mass-mediated. The sender and the receiver occupy the center stage in the communication process. To use Laswell's terminology, they are the who and the whom in the communication drama. Traditionally, this area of study has been called control analysis, the who, and audience analysis, the whom. These two constituents have also been variously referred to as stimulus-response, sender-receiver, encoder-decoder, source-destination, actor-audience, communication-communicatee. Language. Successful communication needs other prerequisites too. Language is a system of symbols. The symbols are arbitrary and reflect the personality of the individuals, as well as the culture they represent. Language plays a vital role in the growth and transmission of culture, continuity of society and its values. It is a message system used for encoding and decoding. Linguistic communication, though not the exclusive form of communication, is fundamental to all human social interactions. Communication through the linguistic interaction is a powerful key to analyze the worldview and psychological processes of societies and individuals. Language is a system of symbols, oral and written, used by members of a social community in a fairly standardized way to call forth meaning. Language is the strikingly distinct attribute of the human person. We can consider three important functions which language performs. Language is the primary vehicle for communication. 2. Language reflects both personality of the individual and the culture of his/her society. In turn, it helps shape both personality and culture. 3. Language makes possible the growth and transmission of culture, the continuity of societies, and the effective functioning and control of social groups. Sign/symbol messages are made up of signs. A sign is a signal that stands for something that has been experienced. There is an important difference between the sign and the object. The sign represents the object at a reduced level. We constantly communicate using signs. We decode signs from our environment, interpreting these signs and encoding something as a result. All communication, including linguistic ones, makes use of symbols. A symbol is something used deliberately to take the place of something else. This is attributed and accepted as such as a medium of communication. Words we use are symbols to which we attach signification. Communication is possible only when the communicator and the receptor are in a position to attach similar meanings to the symbols employed. The human person is not only capable of engaging in symbolic interaction with other human beings or with God, but is also capable of creating symbols. Symbols, therefore, are a fundamental unit of the communication process. Symbols may be verbal, as in spoken words, graphic as in the written word, or representational as in a flag. What the symbol stands for is determined by the social group. The society agrees that a given symbol stands for a particular object. E.g., the word cat. If the individual uses some other word as a symbol, for instance to stand for such an animal, it will in all probability result in blocked communication. Experts in communication sciences speak of communication channel as an effective link between source and sender. The possibility exists of evaluating the effectiveness of communication through checking the channel credibility, the expertness and trustworthiness of the channel. Channel feedback enables the receiver to respond immediately and maximally to affect the source of the message in a communication transaction. Channel involvement, participation, channel availability and permanency are other dimensions that contributes to communication effectiveness. Feedback is the receiver's reaction to the message. It may be favorable or unfavorable, but feedback is necessary to know if the communication has been effective or not. Feedback includes questionnaire, letters to the editor, opinion, forums, comments or even protests or solidarity. The support received in response to appeals in media for assistance for the families of people killed in tsunami or other such natural calamities can be seen as an example of how feedback affects communication. Even the applause of an audience watching a musical program or a mob turning violent during a match may be described as a response to particular events, hence feedback noise. Communication to be successful must be free from noise. Noise in communication theory refers to any limitation or obstacle in the process of message transmission. There are two major types of communication noise: channel noise and semantic noise. Channel noise includes any disturbance which interferes with the fidelity of the physical transmission of the message. In mass communication, channel noise includes such diverse disturbances as static on the radio, smeared ink on paper, a rolling screen on television, or too small types in print. In short, all distractions between source and audience may be termed channel noise. E.g., crosstalk on telephone is a channel noise. Semantic noise is the type of noise that occurs when a message is misunderstood, even though it is received exactly as it was transmitted. This happens when the senders and receivers have no common frame of reference, or have divergent field of experience. In short, they are not in tune. Sources of semantic noise include words or subjects too difficult to grasp, differences in denotative or connotative meaning of words between sender and receiver, cultural differences between the message sender and the message receiver, audience research. Redundancy and feedback are some of the devices to minimize the adverse impact of semantic noise on the communication process. Feedback is more effective in face-to-face communication than in communication through mass media. Human beings live in societies and cultures that are not identical. With the growth of global communication networks through the advancement of technology. Communication between persons belonging to different cultures has become widespread. This kind of interaction is called intercultural communication. The scientific study of intercultural communication is relatively new, though it has been of concern for as long as different cultures have met each other or have lived and interacted with one another. Intercultural communication may be described as the communicative interaction between members of different cultures. It occurs whenever a message producer of one culture transmits a message to a message receiver of another culture. It is again in face-to-face communication that these differences can best be eliminated or reduced. Mass communication tends to overlook cultural differences. Commercialization and control of communication by multinationals with profit motives and governments with dictatorial tendencies often fail to take into consideration cultural differences. Culture is sometimes used by these to camouflage their selfish objectives. The most obvious example is that of commercial advertisements that create new and even artificial cultural symbols and needs. This can result in the gradual elimination of the receiver's capacity to react to the message. Communication becomes heavily source-centered and one-way. The process becomes something like a theater show. Mass media can be used in order to effect a constant cultural penetration aimed at conditioning the masses into an uncritical acceptance of socio-cultural, political and economic values. That is why McLuhan says, medium is the message. Participation and freedom, not control and coercion, are the hallmarks of genuine communication. The process of communication should be initiated through a simultaneous process of making people responsible for their lives, their decisions. Sociocultural identity, values and worldviews shape the communication context which the mass media can, if uncritically and arbitrarily used, destroy. It may, however, be observed that per se there is no conflict between sociocultural values and symbols vis-à-vis the advancement in communication technology. 2.7 Types of communication. Communication takes place at different levels and accordingly we can speak of different types of communication. Intrapersonal communication. When communication takes place within oneself, it is called intrapersonal communication. It includes individual reflection, meditation, and contemplation. Intrapersonal communication includes prayers addressed to the divine, though some authors describe communication with the divine as transpersonal communication. Interpersonal communication. Interpersonal communication takes place between two persons. This includes dialogue, conversation or exchange of views between two persons without using any technological devices like telephone. It is direct, intimate and consists of verbal interaction or gestures. The efficacy of interpersonal communication depends very much on the mutual relationship between the two partners in communication, their status, roles and skills. Group communication. Group communication takes place among a group of persons. It shares most of the qualities of the above types of communication, though in a much reduced way. The number of receivers increase, but participation, intimacy etc. can become lesser and lesser as the group becomes larger and larger. It is both a science and an art. Individual respect is key to effective group communication. Mass communication. When the audience is large, heterogeneous and widely dispersed, the communication used is mass communication. Scientific and technological advances have made it possible to make communication reach vast audience within a short time. Mass communication is a process in which a person, group of people, or an organization sends a message through a channel of communication to a large group of anonymous and heterogeneous people and organizations/institutions. You can think of a large group of anonymous and heterogeneous people as either the general public or a segment of the general public. Channels of communication include broadcast television, radio, social media, and print. The sender of the message is usually a professional communicator that often represents an organization. Mass communication is an expensive process. Unlike interpersonal communication, feedback for mass communication is usually slow and indirect. 2.8 Summary. This unit has been designed to provide a basic understanding of communication, the term, definitions, models and the types of communication. We have analyzed the various factors that shape and influence the process of communication in society. We have presented a number of definitions and models of the leading scholars on the subject. We have placed them side by side with their differences as well as complementarity, so that we get a more comprehensive idea of the subject. Each of the perspectives has something useful to offer in our effort to understand communication. Thank you for watching. We will see you in the next video with the next chapter.